Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codaspoti, and today's guest is Heather Morgan, Chief Content Officer at Alamo Drafthouse Cinema. Founded in 1997 in Austin, Texas, Alamo Drafthouse originated as a second-run movie theater offering food and drinks, and it quickly expanded with a reputation for unique programming, including food-themed cinema events. Today, Alamo Drafthouse operates locations across the nation, delivering unforgettable movie-going experiences and fostering a vibrant film community. Known for its strict no-talking policy and focus on guest experience, Alamo Drafthouse was once named the #1 movie theater in the country by Entertainment Weekly. Now, Heather has held several roles at Alamo, including Chief of Staff and Strategy, where she integrated content strategy with broader organizational goals. Before joining Alamo, she served in leadership roles at Harkins Theaters and AMC Theaters, contributing to operational strategies that enhanced film offerings and partnerships. With her wealth of experience in cinema and her passion for elevating audience experiences, Heather continues to make a strong impact in the entertainment industry. Now, before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. One recent client was able to add over $900 per employee per year in extra cash flow by implementing one of our innovative programs. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefitsagency.com. All right, now back to our guest today, the Chief Content Officer at Alamo Drafthouse Cinema, Heather Morgan. I appreciate you making the time to share your story today.
Hi, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so Heather, you've had multiple experiences in the theater business before coming to Alamo. What kind of first drew you to the industry?
I'll be honest, I wasn't drawn to the industry. It was quite by accident, actually. I got my PhD in industrial organizational psychology, and I was doing organizational consulting. So I was working for a company called Service Management Group, and they consult for companies in the restaurant, retail, and entertainment spaces. They collect guest survey feedback and then advise companies in how they can do better and where they seem to be excelling based on what their guests were telling them. So I thought that sounds really interesting. I would love to help companies with their overall operational strategies, how they're taking care of their employees, and help as many companies as possible. So I went to work for them, and I had a very large portfolio of companies that I was consulting for. AMC Theaters ended up being one of those companies. And after about a year of consulting for them, they wanted to know if I would come work for them exclusively as their director of guest experience. So overseeing all of their operational execution efforts, their escalated guest complaints, anytime a letter was being written to the CEO or, a threat of a lawsuit based on an experience someone had in the theater, me and my team would get involved and de-escalate that situation. And then also just coach theater managers on how to resolve guest complaints and how to deliver better service from the onset so that you didn't have those escalated issues. So that's actually how I stepped into the industry to begin with. That was how my career first started in theatrical exhibition.
So that role that you had, that was less about, sort of making sure that the employees were happy, and it was more about making sure that the guests were happy. And obviously the two kind of go hand in hand, but your focus was more on the guest experience.
Yes.
Okay. Can you give us a specific example of something that happened, whether it's a lawsuit, maybe you can't talk about it, or just like a particular example of a time where, a guest is really upset and then you kind of helped to de-escalate it with the skills that you have?
There were so many examples. Often what ended up happening, the things that became most escalated is when people felt like you were somehow attacking their character or discriminating against them based on how they were treated in the cinema. And generally what that would come down to is a misunderstanding in terms of how something was handled or how something was interpreted. It really came down to a communication issue usually. And so sometimes I would fly to where the guest actually was and have a face-to-face meeting. Often we were able to resolve it over the phone. But what I consistently found is people just want to be heard when they've been upset and they feel like they've been wronged in any way. They want to have a platform to make sure that they have a place to express what it is that they're upset about, and they want to feel like someone is genuinely listening and that someone genuinely cares. And sometimes, depending on who they've interacted with, either at the theater or at the corporate office before it got to me, they didn't feel like they were really being heard, or that the person hearing them didn't really care about what their issue was. And I understand why that is. When you're dealing with hundreds and thousands of guests on an ongoing basis, sometimes it's difficult to make every interaction feel genuine and to feel like you care, but that's really what people need. And that's what de-escalates things. So part of the time I had to get involved and do that directly, but the biggest part of my role, I would say, in that capacity was to teach other people how to do that, how to listen with empathy, teach them what other people were looking for. That's sort of where the psychology degree comes in very handy.
Can you give us some pointers, folks listening now, like a couple, three bullet points? Like how can we be more empathetic listeners and help to de-escalate situations that may happen at work or just kind of in our personal lives?
Well, sure. I would say the first thing is always to listen with the intent to understand and not with the intent to respond. Most people listen to others with the intent to respond. And so you start mentally planning out what you're going to say before the other person is done talking. And they can usually tell that that's what's happened. And then the end result of that is what you say often doesn't address what it was that they were trying to get across. So first and foremost is just listen with the intent to understand the other person's perspective without having your own agenda, without being certain that your point of view is the right one. Sometimes people approach resolution as a negotiation, as though their job is to get the other person to see it from their point of view. If you're trying to de-escalate a situation, that's not your job. Your job is to give the other person space to feel heard and understood. So that's the first of which. The second of which I would say is to ask questions, and that feeds the first. Ask leading questions so that they know that you want to understand their situation, and then apologize for whatever it is, whether the company was at fault, wasn't at fault, regardless of what the particulars of the situation were. You can still be upset. You can still be apologetic that someone had a situation that upset them, that they felt like, didn't go the way that they thought that it should. So you can be apologetic about how something has made them feel without necessarily, admitting fault or guilt or, but to interact with people on a human level, first and foremost, before a business level, I would say.
What do you mean by leading questions?
Leading questions like, tell me more about that situation from your point of view, or tell me why you think the manager did that or said that to you, or tell me, what we could do in this situation to make you feel better about how that was handled.
And so, okay, so just to kind of summarize what I heard, listen with intent to understand, not to respond. Ask leading questions. You want to help bring out their story. You're showing a genuine interest in trying to understand why they're upset, and then apologize. That last step, the apology, does in your role there, does that traditionally come with some sort of compensation? Hey, here's free popcorn. Here's 10 free movie tickets. Does that generally help as part of this formula?
Yeah, often it does. It's interesting though. Sometimes I would encounter people that were somewhat, maybe I would say, cynical about the nature of guest complaints. So people that might work for the company that say people, they just come to us to complain. They just come to complain because they know they can get free popcorn or they can get free movie passes or whatever. And interestingly, the large majority of the time, once you gave people that space on that platform and they felt like you cared about how they were feeling and that you genuinely wanted to help them with the issue that they were having, they didn't want compensation. They would say, oh, no, that's not necessary. I don't need anything. I really enjoyed the time talking to you today. Thank you for listening. I feel so much better. And even if you offered it, they wouldn't take it. So
Interesting.
I would say that, the majority of the time people are not out to just get something free. If they've come to you because they're upset, it's because they're genuinely upset. And once you make them feel better, they don't need or want anything. That said, if they've paid good money to come have an experience at a theater and that experience hasn't been what they felt like they should have gotten, then yes, giving them passes to come back again on us, have another experience is normal course of business and
What's
very
the
justified.
what's the single biggest complaint that comes from folks at a movie theater?
People that come or don't come.
I guess come. Let's do that one first.
Okay. Well, it varies based on what theater chain I've worked for.
Okay.
Alamo takes a different stance to the in theater guest experience, so that changes things. I would say that with my prior companies that I've worked for, the largest guest complaint is usually about other patrons.
Yeah, that would have been
People,
my guess.
people,
This person's
people
making
want
noise. Yeah,
That's it.
they're
Like you
on their
want a communal
phone.
experience. You want to enjoy a movie with someone else, but you don't want to hear them talking to their children. You don't want to hear them eating their popcorn. You don't want them getting up and walking past you all the time.
Yeah.
And so, with I'll call it a traditional cinema experience. Usually you have other guests being the primary source of complaint.
Okay, so you'd already mentioned Alamo takes kind of a different point of view to the customer experience, and I want to hear about that in just a moment. But you went from AMC to another theater. It was Harkin,
Yeah, Harkins Theaters.
Harkins Theaters, and then from Harkins to Alamo. Is that right? Is that sort of how did that opportunity at Alamo first come about for you?
The opportunity at Alamo first came about. The CEO, so Shelley Taylor was hired as the CEO, and she was relatively new to the industry. She came from outside an exhibition space, and she and I had crossed paths along the way very briefly. And she reached out to me to say, actually, no, let me back up. So I had expressed desire when I was at Harkins. I was overseeing content and programming. So essentially the same thing that I'm doing now for Alamo. And I'd been doing something very similar at AMC. So by the time I was, 4 years into my tenure at Harkins Theaters, not only had we made it through a pandemic, but I had also spent a number of years at that point. I'm going to say 8 years in content and programming. So I was ready to stretch my legs and do something else. And Alamo, I got wind that they were looking for a chief operating officer. And I thought that sounds really interesting to me because I came from an operations world at AMC, albeit I've never run a theater, but I know, the general tenets of how to operate a theater. I feel like I could do really well at that. And so I did what you should do when you're seeking a new role with a new company, especially if it's at an executive level. I called somebody from the industry and said, hey, they have this position open. I'm interested in it, but my resume on paper isn't going to look compelling. So is there a way that you can put in a call on my behalf and get me an in, like give me a conversation? And they said, yes, absolutely, happy to help. So I had someone call, endorse me, and I ended up interviewing for the chief operating officer role. And so I had multiple rounds of interviews. And in the end, what it came down to was, we think you're great. We would love to have you join our company in some capacity, but we just don't think you're qualified to be the chief operating officer. You've never, overseen multi-unit operations. And I said, that's fair. That's completely fair. So I just went back, I continued working at Harkins and doing what I was doing. And then they called back, maybe it was a few months later, and said, I don't know why we didn't think of this before, but we have desperate need for a chief of staff and strategy to join the company. And we think you'd be great for it. And these are all the reasons. And that is what led to the Alamo opportunity.
So interesting to me that you were already overseeing content and programming at Harkins, because I thought we were going to sort of get into that transition once you got to Alamo. In my outsider brain, it seems like a little bit of an unusual transition from the role that you were in before. Was it? And if it wasn't, tell me why I'm wrong.
So meaning, how did I transition from operations into content and programming?
Yes, exactly.
Sure. So this all happened actually when I was at AMC. So I was at AMC as their director of guest experience. I was doing that for a few years. And that was when Jerry Lopez was the CEO. And he placed a lot of value on what he called organizational athletes. So these were people that you could take from one area of expertise, pluck them out, put them into a totally different area where they didn't know anything, and they would learn and grow and deliver results. And so he placed high value on that versatility and breadth of knowledge and the diversification of skill set. So I was approached by Elizabeth Frank, who is the chief content officer for AMC. And she said, we want to do this. We want to diversify your skill set. We would like to have you learn another aspect of the business, how we acquire our film content, how we get film on screen, how we program things, how we negotiate our film terms. We want you to learn that side of the business. And she said, what do you think? And I said, well, I think it seems like an odd transition. I don't think I'm qualified. I didn't go to film school. I like movies as much as the next person, but I'm not a cinephile per se. I can't tell you who different directors are. I just don't think I'm qualified. And she said, I understand your concern. That questioning of one's capabilities is completely normal, common, and understandable, but we think you'll do really well and we think it'll be good for your career. So I encourage you to come to my team, give it a shot. We'll see how it goes. So I went over to her team as a film buyer, and that was how I started. I had 35 or 40 theaters that I booked, and you learn the process of how you determine what's going to come off screen, what's going to go on screen, how you negotiate those things with your studio salespeople. I was doing that for a few years and then got promoted at AMC to Vice President of Studio Partnership and Film Finance. In that role, I was still on the content team, but I was interacting with the presidents of distribution for various film studios to do things like negotiate the terms that AMC was going to pay for the films that they were playing, arrange partnerships with marketing, help keep track of the holistic quality of the relationship with each studio. I was doing that when Harkins recruited me to come oversee their content and programming vertical. Really, what I went over to Harkins to do was an accumulation of the various roles that I had had at AMC.
So when you're at AMC and they approach you to do this career shift, sort of a two-part question. The second part I'll say first, did this even enter your mind? Was it important to you? The first part of the question is, as you sort of look at the org chart and where you were and where you were moving to in what sounds like a more junior role, like I don't know, how did that feel? Did that concern you? Was it done with the understanding that you're going to slot here in a learning position, but, in 2 years' time, we're going to make sure that you move up?
Good questions all. I would say it did concern me somewhat. I would say that from a compensation perspective, it was more of a lateral move rather than what you might consider a step down, but definitely a more junior position at the company in terms of level of visibility and level of impact. So yes, that did concern me. And no, there was no guarantee. There wasn't you do this for a certain amount of time and then we're going to move you here, here, or here. It was very much let's see how you do. This is an opportunity to grow your skill set, diversify your knowledge, learn another and very important aspect of our business, and then we'll see how you do with that, and who knows what that could lead to. So I chose to go that path without any guarantees. And I would say I did have some concerns about, really my main concern actually was where that career path would go. Was I all of a sudden establishing a permanent career path in the content side of theatrical exhibition, and how would that allow me to still do things like leverage my industrial organizational psychology degree, connect with people, lead people, mentor people, lead teams. Those are the things that I want to do, that I thrive on, that fulfill me. And so I wanted to make sure that at some point that career track would lead back around to those aspects, because that initial position didn't really have those inherent in it.
It is a little bit of a risk, right? Because when people, when they're looking at your resume, when they're looking at your LinkedIn profile, right, they want to see different track, but, a marketing assistant, marketing manager, marketing director, VP of they want to see that you were on this trajectory. And when from an outsider's perspective, when you kind of ping pong around a bit, it's like, oh, Heather's all over the place. Like, what is she doing? I love what, who was the CEO? Lopez of AMC. I love that style of thinking. Like, let's give you a more well-rounded view of this entire industry, because you're going to be able to eventually connect dots, across these different departments that you've worked for in ways that other people can't. But on your side, it takes a little bit of, I don't know, chutzpah to like say like, I'm going to roll the dice and, let's see what happens here.
Yeah, I try not to. I take my career path and my career growth seriously, but I try not to take myself too seriously. There's no one. Very few things are permanent. There's no decision that can't be undone. If things don't work out, you can always pivot. So I try not to put quite too much pressure on it. But also, if I would have felt like that path was going to lead to a zigzagging or a ping ponging in terms of career progression, I would have been more concerned. What actually has ended up happening, and I didn't know this at the onset, but in hindsight, my career has really been more of an L shape. So I went from operations over to programming and then just up from there. So it's been more of an L. So if anybody looks at my resume, they'll still see that, vertical ascension just with different companies, but in similar roles.
It'd be nice if there were a way to actually structure our CVs that way, right? So you can
Yes.
kind of see that L shape happening.
Let me lay this out graphically.
I wasn't ping-ponging. This was very strategic.
Right.
Okay, great. So now we've kind of painted a little bit of a picture on sort of your trajectory and kind of how you got to Alamo. Now for folks like myself who have never been to an Alamo Drafthouse Cinema, paint a picture. What's going on there? What happens when I walk inside the door? What am I seeing?
Okay, so first of all, I would say that you really do need to go visit an Alamo Drafthouse Cinema, and I will give you passes to go do that if that's what it takes to get you there. Now, we don't have one in Ohio yet, but whenever you're traveling, let me know, and I want you to go. So, Alamo is so unique, and that's actually what I always had my eye on Alamo as a company when I started in theatrical exhibition because it has from the outside looking in, it has this strong brand presence. You get the impression of Alamo. If you look at their marketing, if you look at their social channels, if you look at different, programs that they run in their theater, it presents this image of just being very like cool and edgy and irreverent. And like, that's just not me. And it's never been me. And I've always wanted to be affiliated with like the cool, edgy, nonconformist group. And that was just how I saw Alamo. And I think it's how a lot of people see Alamo. And so I loved it from the beginning. And I always, kind of had my eye on it. When you walk into Alamo, so I don't want to spoil all the surprises because I'm just trusting that you're going to get there at some point. But Alamo is a dine-in cinema chain. So you go in, you go to your auditorium, you buy your tickets generally in advance. You've got them on your phone. You go in, you find your auditorium, you go to your seat, it's reserved seating, you sit down, and the first person you're probably going to interact with is the server. And he or she is going to come up to you and say, hey, welcome to Alamo. Can I see your tickets? You bring them up on your phone. They verify that you're in the right auditorium, right row, right seat. Great. Then they'll say, have you ever been here before? And you will say, no, I haven't. And they'll say, oh, great. Well, here it works. Your menu is right here. And it's like a full menu. So it's not the typical, you can have nachos or you can have a hot dog. It's like you could have, you can have...
I can have a burger. I can have a salad.
You can have a burger. You can have buffalo cauliflower. You can have a salad. You can have a bowl. You can have whatever you want. Chocolate chip cookies. Like, pick your poison. So they'll show you the menu and then they'll say, I can get you something started now. I can take your order. Or if you want time to look, you can just, ring me back when you're ready. And we have call buttons at the tables. So you can take your time, look through the menu, and then write down what you want. But it's not just that. So while you're doing that, we have a custom pre-show that's playing before the movie. So you do go to movies though, right? If not at Alamo, do you go to movie theaters somewhere?
I do. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you're accustomed to normally it's pre-show advertisements playing. Mm-hmm. It's like you're watching an ad for T-Mobile or an insurance company or whatever, right? Alamo doesn't play those. Instead, Alamo does a custom pre-show that's usually themed to the movie that you're seeing. So there's this funny, entertaining content playing. So for example, if you would have gone to Alamo to watch the newest John Wick, you would have seen a whole catch-up tutorial that we did letting you know, this is what's happened from John Wick 1 through John Wick now. This is the evolution of the character. This is
content that you guys have created, Alamo specifically has created?
In-house. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and it's so fun. We do it for every film. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and I took her to go see Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And the whole pre-show was advertisements for sanitary supplies from the 60s and 70s, and she almost died. It was like, Mom. And I was entertained so thoroughly the whole time. So anyway, whatever you're going to go see, my point being, the content ties in with
Get
it.
there early. Like you don't want to show up right at screen time. You want to get there early for the early. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So this is why the Alamo experience is different. So you not only do you want to show up early because the pre-show is part of the entertainment and it gives you time to look through the menu and write down your order and do your thing. So it's just a relaxing, enjoyable experience kind of from start to finish. But we also, as you read about Alamo, we have a strict no talking, no texting policy. That's one of the things that guests love about the Alamo brand the most is they have this a very strong reputation for being strict on talkers and texters because we protect the movie-going experience. So if you go to a regular cinema and you show up 15 minutes late and you're scooting past people to find your seat, at Alamo, you can't do that. If you show up 15 minutes late, we'll just let you know that unfortunately we can't let you in because it's disruptive to the other guests that are watching the movie, but we can give you a refund. We can exchange your ticket for another showtime, but we can't let you in late because it's distracting. Similar to talkers and texters. Like we don't tolerate talking and texting. If you're doing that, we'll escort you out of the theater and then you don't get a refund. And the brand is kind of unapologetic about that. And we had a PSA go viral. You can find it on YouTube, but basically, and this was from a long time ago, but basically there was an intoxicated patron who she was using her phone and turning the light on and trying to find her seat. Anyway, so she was ejected from the theater. She got mad. She called back and left this really angry voicemail. And the company took that voicemail and turned it into a no talking, no texting PSA. And it's got, I don't even know how many, it's got millions of views. It's just one of the funny things that people love about Alamo. So anyway, that's kind of the experience that you can expect. So I'm giving you all of the insider knowledge to make sure that you yourself don't either get A, denied entry, or B, get escorted out.
I appreciate that. Yeah, a couple of things there. So let's say I'm going for a 7:00 movie. What time do I want to get there?
6:30.
6:30 is enough time. So that gives me enough time. I'll be there in time for the custom content that you guys have created or curated, be enough time for me to place an order for whatever food that I want. So I'm not going to the concession stand when I get there. I'm showing my ticket. I'm going right to my seat because whatever it is I want, the server's going to bring to me.
Yes, and there is no concession stand.
Okay.
So we have in-theater dining and we have bars. We have bars in the lobby, and they often operate as kind of independent hangout bars. Some people, we have certain locations where the bar is very popular, and people utilize it as kind of their neighborhood bar, even if they're not going to see a movie. And we host different types of events in the bar. So we'll host trivia nights with Geeks Who Drink, and we'll host drag queen bingo, and we'll host all different kinds of things at the bar. So we sort of operate those in addition to the movie theater. They're a great place to stop and grab a beer if you get there early and you just want to hang out before your movie or after your movie. But they are also kind of standalone destinations just in their own right because they have their own set of programming involved. So you go to the theater.
There's programming at the actual bar itself?
Yeah, not like film programming, but programming meaning trivia nights, bingo nights, comedians, all different kinds of things.
That was going to. I think that kind of answers my next question, which is we've got Alamo, Drafthouse, and Cinema, and Drafthouse and Cinema kind of feel a little bit different. But the way that you just described it there, they kind of like work together, as well as having the bar, the Drafthouse part of it, kind of be its own standalone thing as well.
Yeah, we really love beer and we really love cinema, and so when you just put those together, you get Alamo Drafthouse Cinema.
Gotcha. It's like chocolate and peanut butter coming together.
Yes.
Two things that make each other better.
Beer and good movies go together like chocolate and peanut butter.
You can use that as your new tagline if you want, no charge.
I'm just going to text that to marketing real quick.
Who's the genius that came up with that?
That's right.
So I'm looking at your website here, and am I seeing like stainless steel food trays? Is that part of the experience here?
We have stainless steel like back in the kitchen, yeah.
Okay.
But no, most of your food, again, it's supposed to be a distraction-free environment. So our servers they wear black and dark clothing, black pants, black t-shirts, because you don't want your server your silent service server not disrupting the movie, but wearing a neon green t-shirt, right?
Yeah.
So the servers wear dark, your food is served on dark plates, the tables are a dark wood color. It's all very, because the focus is on the screen. The focus is on the
But
art.
is there
The
enough
movie
light
is
where
what
I
we
can
love.
see what I'm eating?
For the most part,
Probably
yeah.
from the screen. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to say if it's a really dark scene in a movie, you might want to just wait to grab that burger
Okay.
and take the big bites so that it doesn't end up in your lap. But
Yeah.
as long as you're, careful under normal circumstances, yes, you can absolutely see enough to see what you're eating.
Okay, so Heather, give us a little bit about the heritage of the brand. Started out as a second run theater and has evolved quite a bit. Kind of take us through that.
Yeah, so Tim and Carrie League, they founded the company originally about 30 years ago, and Tim is a devout film lover, and so is Carrie. They loved movies. They've always loved movies, but they didn't love going to theaters. And they didn't love going to theaters for all of the reasons I think that people sometimes today complain about going to the theaters, which is we don't want to sit through ads for T-Mobile and insurance companies. We don't want to sit through 8 trailers before a movie starts. We don't want to have to endure people talking or texting during the movie where it's distracting. So what they decided to do was just open up a theater, and it was in a parking garage, and they built it like with their own 2 hands, and they decided they were going to serve food and make it cool and put in all kinds of edgy programming, very much a community theater. And so they designed this movie theater concept for their single screen, upholding all the tenets that they felt like were really important for the movie going experience. And since then, the company has grown, and it's changed ownership and it's changed leaders. But through all that, it's held firm to those brand standards of what it is that's most important to the company and to the guests, and why people love Alamo, and making sure that those don't get lost amidst all these other changes that might be going on. So that's very reminiscent of the Alamo that you'll experience today.
So, what kind of mix of content do we see? Second run, sort of the first run blockbusters that my kids would know about. Those are the only movies I go to anymore, by the way, Heather. I've got 8 and 10-year-olds, so whatever they want to see.
Right.
So,
You've just recently seen Sonic 3 and Mufasa and
yes.
maybe Wicked, and yeah.
We still need to get to Wicked and Moana too, but yeah, I don't even know what anything outside of the kid genre is right now. So what do we see in terms of programming at Alamo in terms of like the indie flicks that you wouldn't see? It's sort of the major run theaters, the second run stuff kind of coming back around, and sort of that, I don't know, first tier programming that I would be familiar with.
Yes, you're all of the
All of
above.
that.
So this is where Alamo shines, I would say. Well, it shines in a lot of places, but this is I oversee content and programming, so this is probably the thing that I'll get most excited about. And it's just that again, the entire company was founded based on this love of cinema and the strong desire to celebrate that love of cinema with people in the community, whether it's people that are working for Alamo, or people that are coming to Alamo as guests, or whether it's the filmmakers that have created the art. Like, we love film and we want to celebrate film of all sizes and shapes. So we play all of the first run studio we play almost all of the first run studio content, like all of the mainstream films that you would expect to find at most other cinema chains. But we play about twice as many films per year as the average circuit does. We play a lot more pieces of content, and that's because we do a lot of repertory programming. We do a lot of
What does that
series.
mean?
Repertory means like the older films. So
Okay.
if you want your kids to see Goonies in the theater,
Oh,
you
love
can
that.
find it at Alamo Drafthouse, and we'll not just play it, but we'll turn it into a movie party and plus up the experience, which is something that I didn't tell you about. But if you want to know, I'll answer any questions. But so repertory films are like all of the old stuff. We play so many smaller indie films. So first run films, but that are more obscure, that larger cinemas might not have any visibility to or might not pick up. Alamo can take those and actually help launch them and make them big. So certain types of films perform much better at Alamo than they're films that Alamo will punch above its weight class in terms of our guests coming out to see, and we can help launch those films. So an example might be Neon's Long Legs that released last year. Long Legs starring Nicolas Cage. It did well for the industry overall, but in the grand scheme of things, it was a very small film. But for Alamo, it was a pretty big film, and we significantly over-indexed on it. Similarly, Focus released Nosferatu. It's still playing in theaters. It does pretty well for the industry. It does really well at Alamo. So the Alamo brand plays really well to certain types of content, and those tend to be the types of pieces of content that could use our marketing and our amplification and our word of mouth. So we lean into those, because what we don't want is an industry that is only fueled by sequels, only fueled by tent poles, only fueled by franchises. We want a healthy industry that's fueled by a love of all different kinds of things. So we play all different kinds of things.
So does a typical location have a lot more screens than a more traditional theater, or are you maybe cycling through the movies a little bit faster than someplace else might?
We don't have more screens. We actually have fewer screens.
Okay.
So your average cinema has around 12 to 14 screens. Most of our buildings have around 8 screens. So we have fewer screens. We do cycle through films faster because they can't live on screen at our locations quite as long, to your point, because we need to bring in new content. But we also just save dedicated space for the non-mainstream stuff. Like rep and indie programming is so important to us that we just save screen space in all of our buildings to make sure that we're getting it on screen and it doesn't get boxed out, because it's a brand pillar. It's a brand pillar for us to play different types of content. So what we don't want to do is prioritize all of the mainstream stuff and to say, we've got 8 screens of the mainstream, so for this week or this month, we don't have room to play any, indie content or repertory bringbacks. We would just never allow that because, again, it's a brand pillar for us and it's identifier. So we save screen space dedicated for other types of content that are not mainstream, if that makes sense.
So I'm looking at your website here. Looks like you're in, I don't know if this is 26 with 27 theater locations, or this is 26 different cities that you're currently in.
We have 42 locations.
Okay. So
right now.
Some cities
Yeah.
you've got multiple locations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to find a pattern. Obviously I see, a number of big cities here, Houston, New York City, Chicago, Boston. But, also some places that are maybe a little bit smaller, like Raleigh and Yonkers and Omaha and El Paso. Like what kind of environment do you guys look for when you think about expansion? What is kind of a good breeding ground for a new Alamo cinema?
Yeah, it's a good question. So part of the reason why you see us in so many different places is because Alamo is the only theater company that has a franchise component. So of our 42 theaters, 26 of them are company owned and the rest are franchise owned. And so we have franchisees that want to open up Alamos in, I would say, smaller or non-major markets. And that is how we tend to get a presence in those types of markets. If you ask about the company real estate strategy from a corporate perspective, we want to be in as many major markets as we can, and especially in markets that are necessary for awards consideration. So we just opened Chicago not that long ago. We just opened Boston not that long ago. We're bringing in 2 more locations in California later this year that are around the Bay Area, though not directly in San Francisco. And so, yeah, we're pursuing major markets, I would say, from a corporate perspective, and then kind of relying on some of our franchisees to help us have representation in smaller markets.
So I'm in Columbus, Ohio. The stats I've read put us at sort of 14th largest metro area. Does that sort of meet your kind of top tier, or is that something that you would kind of wait for like a franchisee to come in and say, hey, I want to open up there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I will tell you that it's like that particular location isn't on our radar eminently, but it doesn't mean that it couldn't be in the future. We are making very opportunistic real estate decisions. So the effect that COVID had on the industry has brought a number of real estate opportunities to the table, far more than we could ever execute on right away. So we're having to be very deliberate and very strategic about which locations we pursue and in what order. So
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Sure, that said, if you want to franchise an Alamo Drafthouse, you just let me know and we'll talk about it.
I don't know. You might need to hire me first so that I can make one of those L moves and you can kind of teach me the industry, because I've got no background in this space.
We'll diversify your skill set.
That's the term I was looking for. Thank you. So Okay, so you guys started out this cool indie brand. You're still this cool indie brand, but this cool indie brand that was back in summer of 2024 acquired by Sony.
Mhm.
Tell me about how that all came about. What was sort of the benefit for each party?
Yeah, so there was a step in between going from a cool indie brand to being Sony owned. So we were a cool indie brand, and then we were owned by Altamont Capital Partners. So we were owned by a PE firm
Mm.
for several years. And then, per just normal life cycle in the PE world, they periodically want to change out their portfolio companies, which is, perfectly normal and expected. And so we started looking for a new home, and Sony was interested in welcoming Alamo Drafthouse into its company. And we felt like that was the best possible scenario for us to land. There was, natural concern about, well, what's going to happen to the company if we're bought by another cinema chain? Does Alamo keep its uniqueness? Does it keep its brand voice? And Sony is the one major distributor that doesn't have a streaming platform. They are devoutly dedicated to the theatrical experience and always have been, even during during COVID, when you had a lot of studios leaning into streaming because they wanted to experiment with different avenues to get their content in front of consumers. And I think they were maybe losing faith in the value of theatrical just because of the COVID influence that it had on the industry there for several years. Sony didn't do that. They kind of stayed tried and true to valuing the theatrical experience. And so when Sony started talking to us about joining their company, it felt like a very natural and fortunate fit for both sides.
How do you feel about the whole streaming universe? Does it feel threatening? Is there a way to kind of view it as complementary? I don't know, obviously, like you said, there was this big shift that happened during COVID because there was no opportunity to go see movies in the traditional
Mm-hmm.
sense. And now, everybody's shifted to streaming. Now it feels like some people are coming back. How do you wrap your head around all that, Heather?
I don't. It's a great question. And depending on who you ask, you'll get vastly different answers. I personally don't view streaming as a threat, and I never have, because I feel like there's so many different segments of consumers. There are people like you who have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, and so there's only certain types of movies that you're going to be able to go see in theater, but you still want to watch those movies, and streaming is your avenue to do it. There are other types of consumers where their kids are older, or they don't have kids at all, or they're, in their 20s, and they want to go out to cinema often to watch movies, and streaming doesn't appeal to them. And then there is another group of audience goers where certain films they want to see in cinema and certain films they're okay watching at home. And so I don't think that one threatens the other. I think that there's plenty of room and plenty of eyeballs for both to exist in a very healthy fashion.
So now, as the chief content officer there, you are responsible for sort of curating the mix of the films as well as overseeing the creation of that custom content that comes at the beginning of each movie. Is that correct? And is there also more that sort of falls under your umbrella?
It's partially correct. So the team
Okay.
that I lead, they curate all of the content that we play on screen, both from a first run and an indie and a rep side. So everything that plays on screen at Alamo Drafthouse is coming through my team. And then we also do all of the, non-sexy nuts and bolts on the back end, which are negotiating the terms that we're going to pay the studios, making sure that we're, you know, um, doing the best business for one another that we can, helping to forge partnerships. The marketing team actually oversees the pre-show content curation, so that lives in the marketing world. But everything else comes through my team in terms of on screen.
Do you feel like you're still able to kind of leverage that expertise from the PhD in industrial organizational psychology, or does it feel like you've kind of left that life behind and gone on to having to develop a whole new set of skills?
No, interestingly, I leverage it more now than I did before. And it's because I will tell you, my team is brilliant. They they are cinephiles through and through. Their depth and breadth of film knowledge far exceeds my own. I mean, not even, I couldn't compete with them if I wanted to. They know film. So if I weren't there, they would still be able to come up with the best in class programming for Alamo Drafthouse. They don't need me for that at all. where I contribute to the team, what they need me for is leadership development and helping to ensure that their strategies that they're deploying coincide with other department strategies within the company, and to ensure that if they have a conflict with a distributor, that we have a way to resolve that things have a way of, escalating and getting resolved that is healthy and collaborative. And so they need me really from, I would say, an IO psychology perspective, because they certainly don't need me from a content programming perspective. They have that so in hand.
It sounds like they are better at that than you would be.
1,000%.
Yeah.
1,000%.
And when they're negotiating these rights and they're sort of choosing the films, am I correct in assuming that just because they got the rights to distribute a film, they're not necessarily trying to get those rights for every single theater? Like it may, hey, this feels like a fit for New York City, but maybe not so much Omaha. So the content's going to be a little bit different depending on the theater.
Yes, exactly. Depending on where the theater is, you have different types of demographics of guests and psychographics of guests that come to that theater. So you'll have certain locations across our circuit that play really well to family content, and others don't play as well. You'll have certain locations that play really well to R-rated horror films, others play less well. And our film buyers are such experts in the locations that they book that they know what content works well and doesn't work well. So they work with the studios to jointly agree upon what we're going to put where.
When you're going into a brand, so obviously when you've got an established location, you've got some history, you can look back and say, yeah, okay, the horror movies did well here, family content, not so much. You've got that historical perspective to look at. But when you're going into a brand new location, are you just kind of throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks? Or is there, I don't know, a more analytical, data-driven approach that can give you some sort of sense of, the demographics and the, 15-mile surrounding area?
It's a little bit of both. So we do go in with a pretty informed perspective. Like, for example, we recently opened a new location in Naples, Florida. Naples, Florida, you would argue maybe doesn't fit the stereotypical Alamo demographic, and that we were maybe going to need to tailor our programming to meet that audience. So we know that going in based on looking at demographics and psychographics of the market. Plus, if it was operating as a cinema before, this is the case with any location. If we take over a location and it was operating as a cinema previously, we can still go back and look at what its film grosses were on certain films. So we can see how it's played in terms of family film, horror film, romantic comedies, pick your genre. So that helps inform our perspective as well. So we go in with a point of view, and then we go in smart enough to know that we don't know everything. So we lean our programming in the direction we think it's going to work, and we also throw a little bit of unknown stuff at the wall just to see what surprises us. And we'll do that for an extended period of time, because when you go into a new market where you haven't had a presence before, be it Chicago, Boston, Naples, it takes your guests a while to find you. So sometimes if people aren't familiar with Alamo Drafthouse, like if you come to Austin, everybody knows Alamo Drafthouse. They know exactly what it is, what the brand is like, what the experience is like, and they know if they're an Alamo person or not an Alamo person. When you go into a new market, people don't necessarily know the brand. So what you have to do is attract large numbers of people into the cinema to have those first few experiences where they're determining if they like it or not. Do I like this kind of programming? Do I like this pre-show experience? Do I like having a server in the auditorium? Do I like eating while I'm watching a movie? Do I not like that? And the people that try you and decide that you're not really for them and that that's just not the kind of cinema experience they're looking for, then you won't get them back, and that's okay. And then eventually you'll find who your people are going to be, and you'll get that stability, and you can start routinely programming to that stable group of people who come to your theater regularly and know you and love you.
What does that marketing look like as you enter a new city for the first time?
Our marketing team is best in class.
Yeah.
Alamo has a best in class marketing team, and the way that they are able to attract people into the cinema and build community relationships is, it blows me away every time. So when we went into Boston, like our team didn't just go into Boston. They developed a partnership with the Red Sox where, we're going to host free screenings in the stadium, and people are going to get to know the Alamo brand that way because we're right across the street. And we'll do things like we have a rolling road show. So Rolling Roadshow is this initiative where basically we bring like the best of cinema outside of a theater and we go to on location places to have experiences. So for example, probably our most famous one is doing a screening of Jaws on the water. So at a lake, for example, you would have people.
I can think of nothing more terrifying, Heather.
Okay, so
I
this is great,
We
but this is
purposefully don't watch Jaws for the month before we go on our beach vacation.
okay. I really need you to get on board with Alamo because I feel like you're going to experience so much. So in the Jaws Rolling Roadshow, not only do we have people watching Jaws while sitting in inner tubes on the water while the movie is playing, but we might also hire some scuba divers to go around and pull on people's feet while they're watching because that's just what makes Alamo cool.
Oh,
It's
that's fun.
right. It's because we love the movie. You want to
Yeah.
celebrate the movie by doing fun things with the
I give
movie.
you a hard time, but that's really fun. That's cool.
We recently did a rolling roadshow with Nope on the ranch by the Hollywood sign. You know, when it was getting ready to release. So we partner with studios as a way of eventizing their films in this new and unique way. So we can do things like this when we're going into a new market where we'll bring out the community and introduce them to Alamo and explain how we love film. We'll give them film experiences. We'll make partnerships with, brands that are beloved and local to them, even if they're massive like the Red Sox. And it just that we drive traffic that way by just having this really big presence in the market. We
I
don't like go in quietly. Try to
I
go in
love that the
big.
two examples that you pulled out there aren't they're not even at the physical locations of your movie theaters, right? I would think like sort of a traditional like marketing idea is, I don't know, we're running a bunch of Facebook and TikTok and Instagram ads, letting people know that this is here. Maybe we're sending out mailers to your mailboxes. Maybe you guys do all that stuff too, like trying to get people into the physical location of the new theater. But I love sort of the outside the box thinking of, hey man, we're close to the Red Sox stadium. Let's do a partnership with them because, I mean, they're one of the biggest brands in the entire sports world. Let's do something fun around Jaws, and it's not at our physical location, but it's a chance for us to establish our brand as being sort of cool, edgy, a little bit of a different experience, and get to have people get to know at least the brand, if not the physical location, that way.
Yeah, I think we do this because it's reminiscent of, oh, not reminiscent, it's characteristic of what people are needing and wanting today. So yes, we do all of those standard marketing levers. Like we pull the table stakes of marketing levers, but we go above and beyond because you have to find people where they are. People are busy. You can't ask them to just go do something extra that's above and beyond. And when we're going into a new market, we need them more than they need us. They don't, I mean, I would argue that they do need us, but they don't know that yet. So we have to
I
go
love that
find them
confidence.
where they are. If they're at the zoo, we have done a screening of The Lion King in the lion enclosure so that are watching The Lion King while surrounded by the lions, right? You're at the zoo, you like entertainment. We're going to meet you where you are and tell you about us, have you get to know us. And then, by the way, you can find us over here at this address. So it's very much people are busy and they don't have a lot of discretionary income and they don't have a lot of free time. And so if you want them to spend it with you, then you need to make a really compelling case and you need to get in front of them. Don't expect them to come to you just because you ask them.
I like that. Speaking of compelling case, somebody made a compelling case for you being one of the top 50 women in global cinema. How did that come about?
Celluloid Junkie is a publication in our industry that I dearly love. By the way, it's not as large as like a Deadline or a Hollywood Reporter or Variety. It's smaller, and I think that's why I love it because they have such a small team and they do such great work. But Celluloid Junkie has a program where they want to elevate and recognize women in cinema. They also do it on the distribution side of the business, and every year they pick. People write in, they can nominate and make their case, and then they have a committee of people who meet and determine who's going to make the list of the top 50. And yeah, in 2023 and 2024 both, I was honored enough to make the list, fortunate to make the list.
Who would be another recognizable name that's on that list?
Oh, so many recognizable names. Elizabeth Frank from AMC would be on the list. Wanda Gerhardt Fearing from Cinemark would be on the list. Aaron von Hutzendorf from NATO would be on the list. Jackie Brenneman, formerly of NATO and now with the Fithian Group, has been on the list. I could go on. Our industry has so many very, very capable, very strong, very intelligent women who are on the list. And it also has a lot of those types of women who didn't make the list because there's far more than 50.
That's nice of you to say. And I was going to say, sounds like you're in really good company, but I think that they're also in really good company with you.
That's very kind of you to say. I often feel like I snuck in. I don't know how I got to, like, I don't know how I got an invitation to this particular party, and I'm just hoping that I don't get found out.
A little bit of imposter syndrome there.
We all carry it.
Yeah, and that's so true. I actually referenced this in another interview recently, but one of my guests, they talked about how, they sort of have come to deal with their imposter syndrome. And they used to think of it as sort of this encumbrance, right? This thing that sort of like brought them down. And the more that they lived life, now he views it as his superpower, right? It's sort of that thing that gives him a kick in the rear end to do better, to get up and, keep proving himself every day. So interesting little sidebar there.
I very much like the perspective of using it as a means of fueling yourself in what you do, as opposed to a means of letting it hold you back. I think that that's fantastic. I'm glad you shared that with me. I like that.
Yeah. Shifting gears on you, Heather, I'd be curious to hear about a particular challenge that you've overcome in life. Something professional, personal, maybe a combination of the two. What it was like going through that and some lessons that you learned.
This is a difficult one for me to answer because I just have the perspective of knowing that my challenges in life have paled in comparison to what actually represents the challenges that most people are dealing with. I've been really unduly fortunate in my life. I haven't ever, I would say, endured any true hardship the way that other people do. So when I talk about difficulty, it's just know that I'm doing it with a very humble perspective of my difficulty is still not all that difficult. But I would say there's a couple. Probably on a personal front, I would say motherhood. Like getting into motherhood was a pretty challenging experience for me. And on the work front, I would say COVID and what it did to the industry and to my profession in particular was certainly the most frightening professional experience that I've had, and something that lasted far longer than any of us thought that it would. So I would say that affected both personal and professionally.
Let's talk about motherhood for just a moment, because this is something that I think doesn't get enough attention. And tell me if the picture that I paint resonates with you at all. Very intelligent, highly driven, very educated woman is on a great path for her career, and then decides that she's going to become a mom. And there's sort of this, I don't know, this identity crisis that kind of kicks in. Am I the professional? Am I the mother? Lots of mom guilt for, wanting to continue the professional career. Any of this feel like it sticks?
That's pretty insightful, sir. I get the impression that maybe you've heard this before from some of your interviewees. Because yes, that's pretty much spot on. And it's fueled by all kinds of things. It's fueled by the expectations that we place on the expectations and the challenges that we put in front of women when it comes to advancing their careers and also performing well as a mom. So some of it is obstacles and expectations, and some of it is just this implicit, sometimes it's implicit, sometimes it's explicit, but it's this messaging that you receive that says you can either be a really successful and dedicated career professional, or you can be a really attentive mom, but you're not going to have enough time to be both. So you're going to have to choose, which isn't true, but I didn't know that it wasn't true at the beginning. So yes, all of those things that you articulated were exactly what I felt. and just sort of also crippling anxiety because I didn't grow. I wouldn't say that I'm naturally extremely maternal, and I didn't grow up with younger siblings. I didn't really do a lot of babysitting, so I didn't have experience caring for something very small. And so like the whole bonding process took a lot longer. I was deathly afraid of the children for quite a while. Now that they're older, it feels totally different. It feels great. What I found from other moms is that they tend to feel comfortable at different phases. Some moms that I know love that infant phase and the toddler phase. And then when their kids get a little older and a little bigger and more independent, they start having more trouble figuring out how to mother. And with other people, it's the opposite. I really struggled in the beginning when they can't communicate and they can't tell me what's going on and I have to try to figure it out. And they're not independent at all. They're dependent upon, adults for everything. They're very sustainability. So the beginning was really rough.
I think it's great that we talked about this for a few minutes because it's another aspect that I think doesn't get enough attention is the parenting experience is different for everybody. I was, as a father, a lot more in your camp of being just terrified of the responsibility of how do I care for this thing that can't even tell me what it needs. And I have to care for it completely and totally because it can't even hold its head up, let alone feed itself. And I, as a dad, felt a lot of shame and guilt in those early days because for me, there wasn't that instant sense of immediate love and connection that I've heard so many other parents talk about. It was just this supreme feeling of enormous responsibility. And so I think it's so important for people to hear that there are different ways to experience being a parent, and none of them are wrong.
And I love to hear you say this because I love hearing about it from, the dad's perspective as well. I think also I used to I've been talking about this kind of from the beginning because I'm pretty transparent in most respects. And so I had so many funny conversations with people when I was a young mom, and people would say, "Oh, how old are your kids?" And I would say, "Oh, 3 and 6 months." And they would say, "Oh, those are great ages." And I would say, "Really? Because I'm not finding that. Like, I'm not finding that to be the case. Are you sure?" And they always looked shocked, and then they always started laughing. But it's true. It's like if your kids are older and you're thinking back on it, you tend to remember it more fondly than maybe it actually was. And once I said that, every now and then, I'll remember one conversation that I had with another young mom. And so she said, "How old are your kids?" And I said 3 and 6. And she said, "Oh, mine are about the same age. How's it going? Don't you love it?" And I said, "Not really. No, I'm not loving it actually at all." And she looked at me for just a second, and then she started crying. And she said, "I don't love it. I don't love it. I'm hating it." And I said, "Do you want to talk about hating it? Because that's okay. Like, it's okay to feel that way." And a lot of people do. And she's like, "Yeah, I really do want to talk about it." And so we sat down and had like a 2 hour, coffee session. And I think she just felt so relieved to find somebody who wasn't, just saying what they're supposed to say.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well put. Well, good. I'm glad we were able to give a little bit of voice to that here today. I want to give you a chance to maybe give a shout out to any particular mentors, maybe books, other types of learning experiences that have been helpful for you in your trajectory.
How much longer do you have? Because I'm a bit of a book person, so I have a lot. I have a lot of books and people that I would mention. I love reading. I have two different types of books. I have books that I consider like cookies, which are, my like sweet treat adult fiction, fantasy, romance, comedy, like, just they're like dessert, right? They're the enjoyable to read books. And then I have the books that I read that I feel like I'm supposed to read because I'm supposed to get knowledge from those. Those are like my broccoli books. And I try to make sure that I'm balancing out my cookies with my broccoli so that I'm getting a good enough balance.
Well, give us a cookie and give us a broccoli.
Oh, cookie books. I have been hitting Sarah J. Maas hard, so hard for months now. I am flying through all of her book series and I just really love them. And she writes in the fantasy realm, which is new to me. It's not a genre that I'm that familiar with, but I'm loving Sarah J. Maas books, really all of the series. So If you haven't delved into those, do yourself a favor. They're just escapist. And she does great character development. Broccoli books. I am reading a new one right now that I'm almost finished with, and I have taken so much from that book. It's by Allison Fregale, and it's called Likeable Badass. It basically she's a PhD psychologist, and so it's fueled with a lot of really applicable stories, but also science-backed research. And it talks about how, in order for people in general, but women in particular, it's written for women, no doubt, but it's applicable to everyone, to be ultimately successful, or as successful as you want to be in your career, you really have to find this blend of being seen by people as both competent and likable. And she calls it out. Like, is that a fair expectation? Should you have to be likable in addition to competent? No, you shouldn't have to be. But these are the rules of the game. And you have to figure out how to navigate the game according to the rules that exist today. Because if you wait for the rules to change, you'll be done with the workforce by the time you'll never see the benefit of that, because the rules will take a very long time to change. So you can still work on changing the rules of the game, but you have to navigate them as they are. So you have to be seen as both competent and likable. These are the obstacles to women being seen as both competent and likable. And these are very applied tactics that you can deploy to help on either side. If you're seen as highly likable, but not all that competent, this is what you need to do. If you're seen as highly competent, but not all that likable, which I would argue is more commonly what I encounter from women, that this is what you need to do. So I love that. It's very applied.
And it's very specific to women. Like
Yes.
the likability component is more something that seems to apply more to women. Like, it's easier for guys to get away with being competent but not likable.
We have noticed.
Okay.
Yeah, the ladies I'll speak on behalf of our collective. Yes, we've
Okay.
noticed that the rules do seem to be written a little differently for us. And I hear a lot of frustration from women about that. And so this book, I think, is just very, poignant in what it does. There's also, again, the tried and true books like Atomic Habits.
I know
Anything,
James. Yeah.
anything built big is built by small incremental steps and just vigilant, habits that make small incremental improvements. So I love how that book breaks it down in terms of, getting results and being very applied. Those are a
No,
couple that are top of mind.
those are
Radical
good ones.
Candor is another favorite, but I could list more for you, but they would be everyone else's favorites too.
Fair enough. I've just got kind of one more two-part question for you before we go, Heather. But before we do that, I want to do two things. First of all, everyone listening today, I know that you love today's content because Heather has been an amazing guest. So please hit the like, share, or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app so you can continue to hear more wonderful content like this. Heather, I also want to let people know the best way to get in touch with you. What would that be?
So I am not a big personality in the social space, and I'm far more an introvert than most people would expect. So if people do want to find me, they can find me on LinkedIn.
Fair enough. We'll include that link in the show notes. So the last question I have for you, I kind of want you to wear both the industry hat as well as the Alamo hat. And
Okay.
I'm curious to hear what you see being kind of the big changes coming in the next couple of years
For the industry,
for the industry as well as for Alamo. If you want to talk about maybe new directions that you're taking, new projects, new locations, and then also, yeah, from an industry perspective.
yeah, from an Alamo specific perspective, I think that we're going to continue to diversify our content, and we're going to continue to grow in a way that is scalable and executable. So, small amounts of locations at a time, similar to these two locations in California, and just continuing to try to keep the best of our guest experience. All of the things that guests love about Alamo, making sure that we're bringing those front and center to the brand in every guest interaction that we have. So just strengthening our foundation and making sure that we don't lose sight of the things that are really important amidst larger industry trends. For the industry itself, in the next handful of years, I would say, if I had to predict, I would say that people are going to lean increasingly heavily into premium large formats and differentiated experiences. So we had COVID, and it essentially shut down the industry for a period of time. And we were used to being a, 11, almost $12 billion box office industry for a number of years. And then we went down to, $2 billion for COVID, and then 6 and 7 and 8. And we've not yet gotten to 9. And so we're not yet even close to being back to where we were pre-COVID. And I think what that's making every exhibitor do is really look at the value proposition that they're offering and marry that up with what consumers are seeking and expecting today. Again, decreasing share of time and decreasing amount of discretionary spending means that you have to increase the value proposition that you're providing to consumers. So that either means keeping your ticket price the same and enhancing the experience, or finding ways to change your ticket price. And I think we'll see both of those trends playing out. So things like enhancing the experience, that's things like ScreenX, D-Box, 4DX.
I don't know what any of those words mean.
It's everything like you sit in the seats and you're watching the movie and the seats move.
Okay.
Or, a gust of wind blows on screen in Twister and you get wind blown in your hair, or water sprays at you, right? Experiential things that feel increasingly different than a traditional cinema experience. And ScreenX is an offering where instead of having one movie screen in front of you, you actually have one screen in front and 2 screens on the sides. And periodically through the film, content will be playing on all of those screens. So it's more immersive than, a standard screen image. Different exhibitors are really leaning in, I'm seeing, to those different types of formats because they want to create more value for the consumer. They want to give people a reason to come out to the theater and to pay for parking and get the babysitter and pay the ticket price, right? You need to make it worth their time and worth their money. So those premium formats, also enhancing with movie parties. Alamo's really big on content that we play on screen, but we have a movie party host and we have props and we make it very interactive. So it feels like you're doing something more than just going to a standard cinema experience. So those are all enhancements. And then I would also say I'm seeing a lot of playing with ticket pricing right now, which I think is actually a very good thing because, again, you have different segments of consumers and some are willing to pay the prevailing ticket price because they want to see the newest film on opening weekend, Friday, Saturday. But then you have other segments that do want to see the film. They do want to see it in cinema, but they can't necessarily afford to pay a $10 or a $12 or a $15 ticket, depending on the size of their family and depending on a number of other factors. And so you're seeing exhibitors do things like leaning into their Tuesday discount day pricing or subscription programs where you can pay a monthly fee and then go see a certain number of movies. I think that you're going to see exhibitors continue to try to pull those either experiential or pricing levers to figure out how to bring new segments of consumers into cinema and or to get existing cinema goers to come more frequently.
Nice. Heather, I want to be the first one to thank you for sharing both your time and your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. I've enjoyed it.
Folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. Thanks for learning with us today.